and welcome to Conversations. I'm your host, Robin Torres. Our guest today is Mr. Deryl Wynn of the law firm McEnany, Van Cleve & Phillips, where he is engaged in a general litigation and corporate practice, emphasizing labor employment litigation, school law, and healthcare law. Mr. Wynn serves as general counsel for the Kansas City, Kansas Public School and Kansas City, Kansas Community College. Prior to joining the McEnany firm, Mr. Wynn served as Special Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. He was also a captain in the United States Army. He was the Chief Trial Counsel for the U.S. Army Transportation Center in Newport News and Virginia Beach, Virginia. In connection with these duties, he was awarded with the U.S. Army Meritorious Service Medal. I could honestly go on and on about Deryl, but that would take up the whole show. So we're just going to go on and talk to him and let him tell us his story. Deryl, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about Deryl Wynn. Where did you grow up? Tell us a little bit about growing up.
I actually grew up all over the country. My dad was in the Air Force, and so we moved around quite a bit. I've lived in Alaska, lived in Lowell, Massachusetts, Cincinnati, Omaha, and Wichita. And most of my formative years were spent in Wichita, Kansas. I went to Derby High School and Fighting Panthers. And from there I went to Emporia State University, where I got a debate scholarship and an ROTC scholarship. And from there I went to Washburn Law School, and from there I became a military lawyer. And ultimately I was going to be a federal prosecutor, and I had a career started there, and we decided we were going to have a family, and my wife said, if we're going to have kids, they're going to be in Kansas. And so came back here. My roommate from college was from KCK. I'm not from here, but he was from here. And then my good friend, John Rios, was from here. And I found out later, believe it or not, that when I came to Boise State, there was a kid by the name of David Allen, who was my roommate, who was from KCK. So I figured that eventually fate was going to bring me back here. That's how I got here.
Okay. Let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
Just a little bit. What made you interested in law?
I was really starting out wanting to be a teacher, and thought I'd be a speech teacher somewhere, and something happened along the way that said, well, you know what, I want to be a lawyer. I wanted to do justice, and I thought in the beginning that I would go about making sure that prosecutions were fair. I started out as a DA, even at Shawnee County District Attorney's Office, as a third-year law student, second years at the AG's office. And then became a military prosecutor, and then U.S. Attorney's Office. And I always was driven by a sense of justice, wanted to see the right thing done, admired Thurgood Marshall, and caught the bug. I found out early on as a prosecutor that justice isn't always served, and I just changed my emphasis to what I practice now, employment and school law.
Okay, now you were special assistant U.S. attorney for the district,
right,
in Virginia.
Correct.
How are the districts broken up?
Well, each state has so many districts depending on how the federal government determines them, and they're all based upon population. And if you have more people, you have more districts. I think Virginia, where I started, had eastern, western, and then northern. They're not divided in four like you think. For example, Kansas has one district. It's the District Court of Kansas. But it's based upon population and congressional districts, I think. Now, you know what? I ought to know that. So I'm sure my partners will correct me when they see this.
Okay.
Very complicated stuff.
That's okay. Tell me about your experience as a captain in the military.
Okay. I was the chief of military justice, and I got to be that at a relatively young age because, as I mentioned, I'd had some prior experience in law school. And A chief of military justice is the chief prosecutor for a military base, or in my case, a post. And so I had a couple other lawyers working for me and an assistant. And when there were crimes committed, we would assess whether or not there was sufficient evidence to prosecute, and then we would try the case.
Can you give me an example of a crime?
Well, I got to try both civilians and service members. One of my first cases, I assisted my predecessor, the chief, in a murder case. It was a crime of passion, 2 soldiers dating the same woman. One soldier finds this out and then kills him with a knife. And in my role in that case as an assistant, just as a trial counsel, was to assist the chief prosecutor. It was a capital murder case, and he was convicted. Go out and interview the witnesses was my job. Collect the evidence was my job. Sometimes you draft questions. By that I mean they're predicate questions which you have to ask to elicit answers to meet your burden of proof. And it sounds technical, but here's what it is. If you are a kid and you're trying to convince your mom that really you didn't do it, you need a good defense counsel. And then typically, if you have a brother or sister that rats you out, they would be the prosecutor indicating that, yes, you did. And they ask questions back and forth in that case, and then both to convince your mother. In my case, I did it real life with adults to convince a judge that there was that there was proof beyond reasonable doubt indicating that this individual committed a crime.
Is the burden of proof different in the military than in civilian?
No, in the criminal case, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. In civil cases, this might be preponderance of the evidence, but pretty much they're the same.
You served as a chief trial counselor?
Yeah, it's the chief of military justice, and my job was both prosecutorial and administrative, because you have to answer to the command. You've got to make sure that the commanding general is informed of the law and appreciates and understands how you're prosecuting cases. My immediate supervisor was a staff judge advocate, which locally would be the district attorney. And the staff judge advocate was a colonel in my case, and my job was to make sure that the colonel and the generals were aware of what was happening. I worked with military police, I worked with the criminal investigation division, and then when I became a special assistant U.S. attorney, I worked with the FBI and others, all to prosecute crimes.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with more questions, and we'll be right back with Deryl Wynn.
Travel advisories to small business loans, retirement savings to Medicare coverage, ID theft protection to contacting elected officials, student loans to taxes online. Whether you have information to get or ideas to give, USA.gov is the official place to connect with your government. From surplus car auctions to finding a new job, our new mobile apps will keep you updated on the go. So, from marriage records to passport applications, veterans benefits to birth certificates, patent applications to energy-saving ideas, product recalls to home buying tips. Check out USA.gov, because the country runs better when we stay connected.
Hi, and welcome back to Conversations. So we're going to continue our talk with Deryl Wynn of McEnany, Van Cleve & Phillips. Now, when we went to break, we were talking about one of the questions I'd asked you earlier, and you wanted to clarify how the districts were broken up. So,
yeah, I gave you a long, complicated answer, and it's not that complicated. The federal districts you get are based upon the population. The more people you have, the more number of districts you'll have in your state. And for example, Kansas, one of the less populated states, has 1 federal district. I think Missouri has 2, the eastern and the western district. That's all. I just wanted to sort of make it a little more understandable.
That's fine. Thank you very much for suggesting that. Let's move to the special medal that you received while in the military. Tell us what that is and how do you earn that sort of a medal?
In my case, it was a meritorious service medal. And at the time, it was a really big deal for me because typically JAG officer gets an Army Achievement Medal, which is a great medal. But my commander at that time gave me the Meritorious Service Medal because when I was in Virginia, I started the U.S. Attorney aspect of the prosecution for my office. At that time, Secretary Bennett said that he was going to launch a war on drugs and he was going to use military officers, military attorneys to do that. And so I started out in that way with the general crimes caseload. And for the Eastern District of Virginia, I prosecuted in Newport News, Virginia, and Norfolk, Virginia. Actually had my first civilian trial in federal court, which was a big deal. And we prosecuted government fraud, waste, and abuse. And over 2 or 3 years, we got good results. And that, combined with our record in the other types of crimes, got me proposed, nominated, and ultimately awarded the Meritorious Service Medal. And I was proud of it. I'm embarrassed talking about it now because in the military you don't brag about your medals. And so we can maybe move on to something else.
Well, I'd like to ask you about that because it is a special medal, and it should be brought up. Now, within your answer, you mentioned JAG.
Oh, Judge Advocate General's Corps. All right, and because not everyone knows what that means. It is the group of lawyers in the military that practice law on behalf of the government and the service members. Like the TV show, but not as exciting.
Okay, thank you. You've written articles and you've made presentations on different topics that you practice on. Tell us what type of topics you discuss in your presentations.
Speak a lot on sex harassment, workplace violence, and drug testing. When I first got out of the military, the civilian or public employers were prosecuting and or disciplining employees for illegal drug use. And because I did that in the military, when I moved over to McEnany, I had experience in, especially with the science, and I started speaking on that. I would tell people that when you test employees, don't just use the screening test, use something else that confirms, called a GC mass spec, which is gas chromatography mass spectrometry, which is a big word, but here's what it means. It means that they measure the drug metabolite with such specificity that the results are as reliable as a fingerprint, so that when someone is confirmed with the GC mass spec as having used the drug, typically, most of the time, 99.9% of the time, you can rest assured that the science and that the claim is valid. Now, whether or not they did it knowingly, you can't prove that, but you can prove that they ingested it. I spoke on that, and then sex harassment and some workplace violence issues.
On sexual harassment, what are some of the most common questions out of the presentation do you get asked?
Is it sex harassment? And I'm asked, hey, when does it happen? How often do these things come up? And my answer is the same. It's always one time of the year around Christmas time, because people trot off to their office parties and they fall in love, and then they act on that, and then it's awkward, and then something happens, and they say, but if it happens outside of the workplace, what does my employer have to do with it? And my answer is, well, where was it advertised? In the office? Where was it posted? In the office. Who was invited? All of the office people. And in those cases, I say, going to be a stronger likelihood that there's a connection enough to the office for your employer to discipline you. That's always the main question. The other one is typically in the next part of the year, February, March, when something comes out and I get calls. You know what it is every February?
Valentine's Day.
No, the spring suit edition of Sports Illustrated.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And the magazine is lying around. Hey, I'm offended by that, says a young lady. And then the men who are looking at it will say, I'm just reading the articles. And so that is something that always comes up. And I tell people, you know what? If it's not necessary to accomplish the mission at work, why have it out? Especially if it makes somebody uncomfortable. It's not just men who are pigs, by the way, because the women have that calendar.
Right.
Do you know which one I mean? Chippendales?
Yes.
And see, when I get women to admit that they know it, then they're not so hard on us men.
Okay, but could a defense to that, and I'm just asking, could a defense to that be, I'm on my break?
Sure.
I can read what I want?
Right, but I ought to be able to come to work and act in my work environment without being objectified or being made to feel uncomfortable because you're reading a magazine that has nothing to do with the job. And sometimes we joke about it a little bit, but I tell the story involving a case that I had where there was a secretary who was able to convince a fact finder with such clarity how men reading a magazine and actually talking outside her office made her feel that it's convinced me that I have to tell employers to err on the side of caution. If it's not necessary for the workplace and you've got individuals, male or female, who are indicating they're uncomfortable, then remove it. Because it's powerful testimony when someone says, every time I came to work I was sick to my stomach because I knew what they were thinking or I saw those pictures. And you know, when you start putting your spouse, your sister, your wife in there, or if you are female, your son or your husband, you get a sense that it's not necessary, certainly not worth the risk to the employer.
Do you think or do you believe that the awareness of what sexual harassment is, do you think that it's really out there enough to protect an employer?
I don't know that it can ever be enough, but I do think that the employers are making a concerted effort to inform their employees, and it's just about being proactive. I don't know that anyone really profits from an environment that's sort of pervaded with sexual innuendo, makes everyone uncomfortable, and it, more importantly, it impacts productivity. Because if I'm always worried about what you're whispering about me, then I'm not focusing on my job. It's not just sex harassment, it's racial harassment. We get the religious harassment as well. And the thought is, if it doesn't contribute to accomplishing the workplace objective, why are you tolerating it? And most employers say, you're right, let's deal with it.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break at that thought, and we'll be right back with Deryl Wynn of McEnany, Van Cleve, and Phillips.
Over half the people waiting for an organ transplant in the United States will die before they get one. You can increase your chances of getting a life-saving organ donation by joining Life Sharers. You get preferred access to the organs of other members. In return, you give fellow members first access to your organs. Membership is free and anyone can join. Join Life Sharers now. It's free and it could save your life.
Hi, and welcome back to Conversations. We're here with Deryl Wynn of McEnany, Van Cleve, and Phillips, and I have a question.
Okay.
What do you see as a serious threat to public education?
Wow. Well, it's one that you're going to continue to read about in the paper, I think, for 3 years, and I'll call it a challenge, and it is adequate funding of public education and making sure that teachers and administrators have the resources they need to do the job that we expect of them. And one of the things that I hear often is that it's being wasted or that they have too much, but that's just not true. one of the things I think that we forget is that right now, public schools do more than educate kids. K-12, they feed them because not every kid gets what they need at home. And then they provide them the type of education that we used to get when I was younger from grandparents and parents. And then they provide after-school care because mom and dad have to work. Mom and dad are trying to make it. There's nobody lazy, although you have some, but that's not the threat. It's just that you have to work longer. What do you do with your children? Well, you either send them home to be latchkey kids, which I was, or you leave them with groups you trust. Public schools have before and after school care. And then they have all the other things they provide. They provide the socialization of the students and the kids. We even now educate parents in public schools because they're struggling too. And so when you reduce the social services that the government used to provide in the various state and local agencies and shift that to the public schools, then it strikes me that you should know that you're going to have to devote more funds to public schools.
Who's forgetting? Who's forgetting, and why are they forgetting?
Well, the main persons or the main group that we tend to blame is the legislature. And they've got their share of blame. But I think parents do. I think those that don't have kids in public schools do. There's plenty of blame to go around. And we've spent the last 10, 15 years blaming one another. And here's what I see has happened. The adults are blaming one another, and the kids still aren't being served. And we all know they're not being served, but we don't have the courage or the commitment to fix it. And so I guess apart from funding, I would just say that the commitment or the courage to fix what's broken a little bit at a time. I don't know that we can fix it in 1 year.
How do we fix it? I mean, how do we even begin the process?
I think you have to listen to the teachers and the principals as well. And in turn, they have to listen to the legislators and the parents. And there has to be a dialogue by the grown-ups that begins with what can we do that's best for children, what can we compromise, and how do we get there? But no matter where the discussion goes, we have to begin by recognizing got to put more money in public education. And how much more, we'll debate. But here's what we do know. We can't keep taking it out and expect to get better results. It's just not going to happen.
I'm sitting here thinking about that, and it strikes me that I have a daughter, and she's going to be graduating next year. And honestly, the public education funding would probably not come to me anymore because she won't be in the K through 12 school system, but it still does affect the rest of the kids who still have to continue going to school. And eventually, I guess it does still affect those even without kids, because
Absolutely.
We still don't want a society full of kids who are not educated properly.
And that's the key. And you know, what I'm sensing may be a wonderful resource are grandparents. But in order to get the full sort of flavor for what I'm trying to say and not doing a great job of, if you go to an elementary school, and I don't care where you go, and you see a bulletin board, and it's great. You look at that bulletin board and you say, wow, that's nice. But you probably don't know that the bulletin board, especially in an urban area, if it has a lot of the bells and whistles on it, was probably paid for out of the pocket of your public school teacher, who doesn't make that much to begin with. And I just think that people need to know that. And I know teachers at all levels who do what they're supposed to do and then come back and assist and educate and mentor the kids on their own time because they're committed. Now, we've got some the other way, but they're not that many. But the ones that are doing what they're supposed to do, my thought is just need some relief every now and then in some affirmation from us indicating that these things are fine. And in my family, my wife and I do that. I got to confess, mostly my wife, who's up there and who knows the boys as teachers and is involved because of the commitment. But I come from a family with educators in them. And so it was just something that in my household you always had to respect. And that's another value that we might inject or fortify in public education to get us where we want to go.
Okay.
I'm on my soapbox now. I'm climbing down.
Okay, that's okay. Let's move to a law firm.
Okay.
And I'm not going to focus on McEnany, but what is the hierarchy like in law firms? I mean, how do you move up?
Well, the hierarchy you mean for lawyers?
For lawyers.
Typically, you start out as an intern or a clerk, which is a sort of lawyer in the making, still in law school, maybe undergrad. You start that early, and then you're hired as an associate. And an associate has a capital A. It's a title, and the associate is the one that assists a partner or shareholder, which are the same thing, with representing a client. They write the briefs. Typically, they do what we call the grunt work, or the work that maybe is better spent by somebody with less experience. After associate, the next level is a partner or shareholder, and these are the individuals with a stake in the business, some ownership in the business, and they run the heart and soul of the firm. After that, a lot of firms have a senior partner or a senior shareholder, which means that they've been there a while and maybe have a little more authority or investment in the firm. Those are the three levels. Sometimes you have an emeritus, and sometimes you have lawyers that retire but that are still involved in the firm because they still have something to contribute, and they add to the depth of the firm as well, because if you've been around and you've seen some things, then you can take an associate or a younger partner and say, you don't want to do that. Here's a better way to handle that problem. Okay.
How realistic are the legal shows that are on as compared to real life attorneys?
Well, there are so many. Some of them are realistic, but most of the ones that are entertaining are not. I mean, some of the work is exciting, but not all of it. The relationships that you see in those shows, I think that's pretty realistic, except for all the spicy stuff. But not so soap opera-ish, but typically just professionals that are doing what they're supposed to do.
Okay, because I have to admit, The Good Wife is my favorite show this season. But I, kind of wanted to get your take on.
I don't see it that much. I do sometimes walk in on it being seen in my home. Aspects of it are realistic. I think when you see how late that they work and that sort of thing, they are. But all the drama where they just have these pithy sayings and they always seem to be on, I don't see it. And even with the good lawyers, I mean, when you hit a stride and when you're good, but it's not every day. It's just not every day.
Okay. Well, we'd like to thank you for being a guest on our show today.
Well, thank you.
You were very, very entertaining and educational. I learned a lot.
You're kind to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. And thank you for joining us on Conversations. We'll see you next time.